The wind struck the ancient corridor like a blade, and the hidden door flew wide as dust leapt. The narrator watched Prince Rowan flinch as a whisper coiled from the dark like smoke. Prince Rowan said, "Who dares speak in my father's hall?" The voice answered from nowhere, "Your name is debt, and the night will collect." A bell tolled from the city, slow and cold, and a sword slipped from its mount to shatter on stone. Prince Rowan said, "Show yourself, coward." The torches guttered, and a draught carried the scent of rain and iron. He stepped forward, heart drumming, and the floor stones trembled under his boots. The door's carvings writhed like vines as shadows braided into the antlers of a beast. The whisper pressed against his ear, "Love is your ransom, or love is your ruin." The narrator followed Rowan into the antechamber where the storm spoke through stone. Master Aldric waited by a brazier, and his staff hummed. Master Aldric said, "You heard it at last." Prince Rowan said, "It knows my name." The old mage bowed his head and fed the coals with a sprig of rue. Sparks rose like fireflies. He unrolled a map inked with thorn sigils and a single heart drawn in red. Master Aldric said, "The curse takes root when pride meets fear." Prince Rowan said, "Then I have watered it well." The chamber shook as thunder rolled, and distant hooves echoed like drums. The narrator felt the hour closing like a fist, and the brazier's smoke curled into a crown that broke apart. The throne room waited like a trap, and banners hung heavy with damp. Queen Morwen stood beneath a cracked skylight, and the moon drew a hard line across her crown. Queen Morwen said, "Your father sleeps while storms sit at our table." Prince Rowan said, "I will hold the line." She smiled without warmth, and her ring clicked against the throne's arm. The narrator saw the court watch like wolves in velvet. A bell tolled again, closer now, and the floor hummed with a buried note. Queen Morwen said, "Oaths bind more tightly in the dark." Prince Rowan said, "Then bind me, and I will not break." The air thinned as if something held its breath. In the chapel, candles ringed a mirror veiled by cobweb lace. Sir Gideon knelt with polished calm as if prayer could polish truth. Sir Gideon said, "Command me, and I will hunt your shadow." Prince Rowan said, "Hunt the voice instead." The narrator felt a draught trace the altar like a finger. The mirror fogged from within, and letters appeared backward, spelling mercy and then ash. Sir Gideon said, "Mercy is a coin for richer men." Prince Rowan said, "Then keep your purse closed." The candles leaned one way as if the hall itself breathed, and the veiled glass darkened to a well. The courtyard yawned beneath the storm as stable doors slammed and chains rattled. Tomas ran in with mud on his boots and courage in his eyes. Tomas said, "I saw antlers on the rain." Prince Rowan said, "So did I." The narrator tasted iron on the wind like a promise. Lightning stitched the sky and stitched a shape upon the keep. Master Aldric said, "It will mark you before dawn." Queen Morwen said, "Let it if it makes you useful." Sir Gideon watched from shadow, and his smile did not reach his eyes. The bell sounded a final time, and every horse went silent. Dawn crawled across the library stacks as if afraid to wake the dust, and the narrator felt the room hold its breath. Prince Rowan traced a claw mark hidden in the oak desk and shut his eyes. Prince Rowan said, "It began before I earned any scars." Master Aldric stood in the doorway with a tired grace, and the brazier's ember glow painted old maps gold. Master Aldric said, "The door did not choose you by chance." Rowan lifted a tiny music box carved with stags, and the lid sighed like a winter branch. Prince Rowan said, "If I am debt, what coin pays me back?" Aldric rested his staff on the floor and listened to the faint melody grinding against silence. Master Aldric said, "Mercy pays late, yet it pays." The narrator watched Rowan pocket the box as if it could shield a heart from iron weather. Prince Rowan said, "I will not beg this curse to spare me, only those it might harm." Thunder far away answered like an oath made by the sky. The narrator followed Rowan to the stables, where wet straw steamed like breath, and the air smelled of iron and sweet hay. Tomas brushed a trembling mare, and his hands shook only when he stopped. Tomas said, "She hears the bell even when it is quiet." Prince Rowan said, "So do I." Master Aldric set a small charm above the stall, and hummed a note that matched the wind. Master Aldric said, "Fear names itself when heard aloud." Rowan took the brush and finished the strokes with careful wrists, and the mare calmed. Tomas said, "I was afraid to tell you." Prince Rowan said, "You told me anyway, and that is courage." The rafters popped as rain slid off the eaves, and a swallow stitched across the light. The narrator felt a hinge within Rowan's voice, where duty opened into gentleness. Master Aldric said, "Compassion is the path through bramble." Prince Rowan said, "Then let me walk it for the ones who cannot." By noon the great gate lifted, and banners snapped like warnings, and an envoy crossed the slick cobbles. Lady Elara dismounted with poise, wrapped in road dust, and the narrator saw fire bank behind calm eyes. Lady Elara said, "I bring terms and a question." Prince Rowan said, "Ask the question first." She studied the cracked battlements, as if reading a wound. Lady Elara said, "Do you wish to be feared or seen?" The courtiers murmured like bees trapped in a bell, and Queen Morwen arrived with a smile forged for ceremony. Queen Morwen said, "We prefer results to riddles." Rowan did not bow to the pressure in the air. Prince Rowan said, "I prefer truth that bites and heals." Elara's jaw eased as if a knot learned how to breathe. Lady Elara said, "Then we may speak as equals, even if others disagree." The narrator felt the hour tilt, and the gate shadows lengthened like a promise kept too long. Evening gathered in the glass house, where vines curled around iron ribs, and lanterns shed honey over green. The narrator watched Rowan and Elara stand among damp leaves and the slow heart of a fountain. Lady Elara said, "Your people tell stories with locked doors." Prince Rowan said, "Mine begin with them, and rarely end well." A moth tested the lantern's warmth, and the sound of water stitched quiet together. Lady Elara said, "Where would you go if the gate opened?" Prince Rowan said, "Anywhere I could do no harm." She touched the mossed rim, as if considering its patience. Lady Elara said, "You do less harm than those who never ask." Rowan almost smiled, and then the smile remembered the bell. Prince Rowan said, "The night will name me soon." The narrator felt truth stand between them like a tree that offers shade and shelter and a place to carve a vow. Night returned with a quiet that listened, and the narrator followed Rowan to the parapet where the wind lifted the world's edges. A tremor took his hand and drew lines beneath the skin like silver roots. Prince Rowan said, "It marks me when I think of peace." Lady Elara set her palm over his wrist and steadied the storm he could not see. Lady Elara said, "Let it know you are not alone." Far below, the river wrote moonlight into broken script, and the keep breathed with old stones. Master Aldric kept his distance by the stair, and his eyes held both warning and faith. Master Aldric said, "Anchor yourself in a name you choose." Prince Rowan said, "Rowan, son friend, keeper of vows." The tremor eased, as if a tide agreed to pause. The bell did not ring, and the wind unknotted. The narrator felt a fragile center form where darkness expected a door. The narrator found Rowan in the wallroom, as rain penned lines across the windows. Maps lay open like wounded beasts, and pins glittered like teeth. Master Aldric said, "The antlers trace a circle around the city." Prince Rowan said, "Then in the circle is a noose." Tomas hovered by the door with a bundle of arrows and a look he could not hide. Tomas said, "I marked where the bells echo the loudest." Rowan studied the marks and pressed his palm flat to steady a tremor that wanted to speak. Prince Rowan said, "We will set watchers where the sound turns cruel." Aldric breathed as if counting years he could not reclaim. Master Aldric said, "Beware counsel that arrives too smoothly." "Ah, Sir Gideon entered with boots that never squeaked and offered a bow that bent just enough. Sir Gideon said, "Your enemies ride by night, and I can break their lead." The narrator felt the room tilt toward a choice that would cost more than steel. The narrator rode with Rowan beyond the north gate, where fields wore a sheen like cold glass. Fog braided the hedgerows, and crows stitched warnings through the air. Lady Elara kept pace with a calm that challenged the road. Lady Elara said, "Your circle has a seam." Prince Rowan said, "Show me where it splits." She pointed to a lickstone that leaned like a tired sentinel. Lady Elara said, "Listen for the pause between bells." Rowan closed his eyes, and the wind held a breath that did not belong to wind. Prince Rowan said, "There." Hoofbeats answered from the fog, neat as a drumline taught by pride. Sir Gideon raised his hand and smiled without apology. Sir Gideon said, "Ambush them in the lull." The narrator watched Trust step out onto black ice. The fog tore like cloth, and riders burst through with antlered helms and eyes set for ruin. The narrator felt steel find the air and make it ring. Prince Rowan said, "Hold the seam." Tomas loosed an arrow that sang its brief song, and then became quiet mercy. Tomas said, "Left flank." Elara cut a rein, and spared a life that did not deserve it yet. Lady Elara said, "Go home or be carried." Sir Gideon drove forward with a grace that asked no questions. Sir Gideon said, "Break their lead and their courage will drown." Rowan met the captain's charge and turned it with a wrist that remembered patience. Prince Rowan said, "You will not enter our circle." The bell sounded faintly from nowhere and everywhere, and the horses shivered. By dusk the courtyard smelled of victory that did not taste like it. The narrator counted wounded more than trophies, and learned the math of narrow escapes. Queen Morwen descended the stair with silk that whispered like a blade. Queen Morwen said, "You bring rain inside with your mercy." Prince Rowan said, "I bring men home." She touched his cheek as if testing for fever or weakness. Queen Morwen said, "Strength arrives without apology." Master Aldric watched from the arch, and measured silence like a physician. Master Aldric said, "Some victories demand repayment." Sir Gideon stood at ease with armor, unmarked by doubt. Sir Gideon said, "The raiders will not trouble us soon." Rowan looked past him toward the parapet, where shadows wrote with longer pens. Prince Rowan said, "Soon is smaller than night." Night pressed close as Rowan climbed the tower, where the bell rope hung like a vein. The narrator heard the hush that gathers before a story changes its name. Lady Elara said, "Your circle holds, but not your heart." Prince Rowan said, "My heart is a door I cannot lock." The rope quivered, though no hand touched it. Master Aldric said, "Ask who pulls when you sleep." Sir Gideon arrived with a lantern that painted honesty on his face. Sir Gideon said, "Let me stand the watch while you mend." The lantern threw two shadows where one should stand, and both moved. Prince Rowan said, "A watch that asks for trust should bring proof." The bell did not ring, yet its echo pooled at their feet like dark water. The narrator felt the first thin crack run through the circle. The narrator followed Rowan into Briarwood, where thorns leaned like listeners, and the path forgot its name. Master Aldric said, "Tests arrive as kindly roads." Prince Rowan said, "Then this kindness bleeds." Tomas brushed aside a branch marked by a triple rune that pulsed once and died. Tomas said, "Something counted us." Lady Elara stepped where the earth looked truest and watched the trees watch back. Lady Elara said, "Truth is a path that moves underfoot." Sir Gideon smiled and cut a shortcut through bramble as if maps bowed to him. Sir Gideon said, "Trust a blade to teach patience." The wood breathed a warning that smelled like iron rain. The narrator felt the circle stretch thin, and Rowan's calm learned how to shake and keep walking. They reached a river where stones wore crowns of lichen, and the current sang a riddle. A shape rose from spray like moonlight learning to stand, and the guardian bowed with antlers made of water and wind. Kale said, "Your names are keys, but some open cages." Prince Rowan said. Then teach me doors that do not trap. Master Aldric lowered his gaze as if before an elder winter. Master Aldric said, answer plain and pay in breath, not blood. The river paused long enough to hear its own heart. Lady Elara said, we cross to protect those who cannot. Cale tasted the truth and stepped aside with weathered grace. Cale said, go, but leave one fear behind you. The narrator felt Rowan drop the fear of being seen and keep the fear of failing those who trust him. Dusk knelt over the clearing where a ring of standing stones kept old promises. Sir Gideon said, rest here and let me set the watch. Prince Rowan said, the watch is shared. The stones hummed like bees trapped in ice, and a shadow pressed close to Rowan's skin. Master Aldric said, name yourself before the dark names you. Rowan breathed slow and counted the beats between anger and mercy. Prince Rowan said, I am Rowan, keeper of vows. The pressure eased, then lunged when Gideon stepped back with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Lady Elara said, do not let him choose your pulse. Tomas held a flask and a courage larger than he felt. Tomas said, drink, and remember the mare that calmed. The narrator watched the shadow pause and forget its hunger. Back at Briarhelm, the narrator crossed marble that remembered coronations and grief. Queen Morin faced a courier whose coat smelled of wet ash. Queen Morin said, tell your lord, the price rises with each bell. The courier bowed like a man walking a cliff. The message bled red wax, shaped as antlers, and the seal felt colder than rain. Queen Morwen said, if Rowan fails, the circle tightens around my throne. Master Aldric's raven landed on the sill and scraped the stone once. Master Aldric said, the circle answers those who feed it. She turned to the window, where the city held lamps like small brave hearts. Queen Morwen said, then we will feed it a lie and starve its hunger. The narrator heard the palace choose a mask it would struggle to remove. The catacomb door hid behind a fallen saint where Ivy learned patience. Sir Gideon said, this way spares an hour. Lady Elara said, shortcuts charge interest. The narrator felt the stare swallow light and give back a smell of salt and age. Tomas touched each step as if bargaining with stone. Tomas said, I will go first. Prince Rowan said, we walk together. The passage narrowed until breath became a chore that required faith. Master Aldric said, when the dark asks for a name, answer with one you chose in daylight. A grind of rock closed a seam behind them, quiet as a secret. Prince Rowan said, no one moves alone. The echo lied and walked ahead anyway, and the floor sloped toward a chamber that waited like a verdict. The chamber opened like a wound beneath Briarhelm, and the narrator saw walls painted with winter scenes that never thawed. Master Aldric brushed ash from a mural where a queen knelt before an antlered shadow. Master Aldric said, this is older than our throne. Prince Rowan said, the queen is my mother. Letters glimmered where soot hid them, and a cradle gleamed with silver filigree. Master Aldric said, a pledge was signed with bell iron and breath. Rowan touched the painted cradle and felt cold climb his arm like ivy. Prince Rowan said, she bound me before I could choose. The mural's shadow reached across the stone and matched his outline too well. Tomas said, we can unbind what was bound. Lady Elara said, not if the knot was tied to protect a crown. The narrator heard the river above hold still, as if memory had the power to halt water. The narrator climbed into the royal crypt where rain ticked on the stone like patient fingers. Queen Morin stood between sarcophagi and did not flinch when truth arrived. And Queen Morin said, I paid so the city would live. Prince Rowan said, you paid with me. She faced the carved lids of kings who could not advise her now. Queen Morin said, the raiders were a symptom, not the sickness. Master Aldric kept his eyes lowered, shame folded into discipline. Master Aldric said, the contract promised safety when the air was mocked. Rowan's breath cut short, and the bell that was not present pressed on his ribs. Prince Rowan said, you chose fear and called it love. Queen Morwen said, I chose survival and called it duty. The narrator tasted iron in the air and understood why crowns are heavy even in silence. The narrator felt the ambush arrive like a verdict when the bell rope moved without hands. Sir Gideon stepped from shadow with a lantern that made honesty look easy. Sir Gideon said, I keep the terms you cannot. Prince Rowan said, you keep yourself. Chains of bell iron lay coiled like sleeping snakes, and their echo was a whisper with teeth. Sir Gideon said, a circle needs a center, and I prefer a strong one. Tomas reached for a knife and found courage, not leverage. Tomas said, stand away from him. Gideon's smile did not climb into his eyes. Sir Gideon said, I stood with him to bring him here. Lady Elara moved between iron and skin, with a grace cut from refusal. Lady Elara said, you mistake obedience for order. The lantern shook, and the rope trembled as if laughter had learned to ring. The narrator watched a second truth arrive with the sound of rain finding stone. Lady Elara ungloved her right hand and revealed a signet that carried a forgotten crest. Lady Elara said, I am the oath you feared. Prince Rowan said, you were sent to trade me. She did not retreat from his hurt, and she did not apologize for blood she did not spill. Lady Elara said, I was sent to weigh you, and I chose to stand with you. Master Aldric's eyes widened as history rearranged its furniture. Master Aldric said, a betrayed line breathes in you. Elara closed her fingers over the seal, as if closing a wound. Lady Elara said, my house died to buy this chance. Prince Rowan said, then let us spend it on mercy. The rope above them stilled, as if listening for a different ending. The narrator felt the circle flex when the river guardian stepped through the arch with light clinging to antlers. Kale said, a curse ends when its truest name is spoken by the marked. Prince Rowan said, then let me name it. Sir Gideon tightened the chain and found it heavier than pride. Sir Gideon said, names cannot change iron. Kale turned his gaze like weather, turning a season. Kale said, iron changes when hearts refuse the shape it demands. Rowan faced his mother's silence and Elara's steady fire. Prince Rowan said, I am Rowan, keeper of vows, and I choose love that harms no one. The chain loosened, as if breath returned to metal. Queen Morwen said nothing, but her crown tilted under memory. The narrator understood that the price would come due in the next storm, and the bell saved its loudest note. Dawn broke like a blade across Briarhelm, and the narrator felt the city brace for a verdict. Prince Rowan stood on the parapet where wind filed fear into a cleaner edge. Prince Rowan said, let the bell find me awake. Lady Elara joined him with eyes that held storms and clearings. Lady Elara said, stand in the name you chose. Sir Gideon approached with the bell iron chain, looped like a promise that hurts. Sir Gideon said, order requires a center, and you are soft iron. Master Aldric set his staff and drew a circle of breath around them. Master Aldric said, strength listens before it strikes. Queen Morwen watched from the arch where crowns learn to weigh more than gold. Queen Morwen said, end this before the city learns panic. The narrator heard the bell stir deep below, as if the tower had grown a heart and meant to use it. The bell chamber breathed cold when they entered, and dust rose like ghosts rehearsing regret. Sir Gideon said, tie him, and the circle holds. Tomas stepped between iron and friend with more courage than weight. Tomas said, if a circle needs a prisoner, it is a trap, not a shield. Queen Morwen lifted a hand, and the chain paused like a thought. Queen Morwen said, we keep the city, not your comfort. Lady Elara moved to Rowan's side and drew a knife that had sworn gentler oaths. Lady Elara said, we keep the city by refusing fear's geometry. Master Aldric spoke a name that made the rope forget its hunger. Master Aldric said, let choice ring before iron. Prince Rowan said, I choose those who cannot reach this tower. The narrator felt the bell lean down like a listening god that remembers it once was human. Thunder stamped above as antlered raiders poured through the north gate. and the narrator felt the story choose speed. Sir Gideon said, "Hold the tower, and the heart survives." Prince Rowan said, "The heart must move, or it dies in place." He ran for the stairs, and the others followed like arrows learning faith. Lady Elara said, "Meet them before the fear arrives." Master Aldric traced wards that tasted of winter apples and old prayers. Master Aldric said, "Let harm break on what listens." Queen Morin ordered the archers with a voice that did not tremble. Queen Morin said, "Loose on the second step of their pride." The bell tolled once, not by rope, but by resolve, and the walls answered. The narrator watched Rowan descend into the storm, as if into his true shape. Clash met them in the yard, where rain hammered courage flat, and then raised it again. Sir Gideon said, "Break their captain, and the rest unravels." Prince Rowan said, "Stand with me, not behind me." The captain charged with antlers lacquered black, and sparks wrote brief stars where steel disagreed. Lady Elara cut wide, taking space away from fear and giving it back to breath. Lady Elara said left, then high. Rowan turned, found the opening, and spared the life that would spread mercy faster than rumors. Prince Rowan said, "Go home and leave our dead to sleep." Master Aldric bent the rein so arrows missed hearts and found shoulders. Master Aldric said, "Pain without graves." Queen Morwen watched the line hold and let a tear vanish in the storm before anyone could measure it. The narrator felt the tide tilt toward them. Silence arrived like a held breath when the raiders broke and fled, and only the bell's aftertaste remained. Cale stepped through rain as river and man and memory. Cale said, "Speak the truest name now, before doubt dries." Prince Rowan faced the city, the crown, and the mother who chose duty that scorched. Prince Rowan said, "I choose love that does not require a cage." The antlers on the keep's shadow unbound like mist, remembering it was water. Lady Elara said, "Walk free and keep your vow." Queen Morwen closed her eyes and accepted a grief that would not be public. Queen Morin said, "Be the king I could not raise without fear." Master Aldric rested his staff and let relief ache. Master Aldric said, "The circle is a path, not a prison." The narrator watched the curse loosen, as if the tower exhaled for the first time in years. Morning laid a clean sheet of light over Briarhelm, and the narrator felt the city learn how to breathe again. Prince Rowan walked the wounded yard and counted bandages instead of scars. Prince Rowan said, "Every breath is a vow kept." Tomas carried water with a grin that forgot to hide. Tomas said, "The mares ate without flinching." Master Aldric traced a circle in soot and then scattered it to prove a prison could become a path. Master Aldric said, "Let endings seed beginnings." Queen Morwen stood near the gate, as if listening to footsteps she had not earned back. Queen Morwen said, "I will pay for what fear bought." Lady Elara moved among the healers and left steadiness where she passed. Lady Elara said, "We rebuild by lifting together." The bell hung still, yet its silence felt like music that chose mercy over noise. By noon the hall opened its long windows, and the narrator watched petitions arrive like birds that finally trusted seed. Queen Morin stood before the court without the old iron in her voice. Queen Morin said, "I will answer for the oath I forged." Murmurs shifted from sharp to curious. Prince Rowan said, "Let truth heal faster than rumor." Master Aldric placed the bell iron chain on the table and marked it as a relic, not a rule. Master Aldric said, "Let this teach, not bind." Tomas laughed when a child tugged his sleeve and asked if heroes eat stew. Tomas said, "Only twice." Lady Elara stepped forward with a parchment that named reparations in ink steadier than anger. Lady Elara said, "We repay the villages the raiders scar." The hall breathed out, and sunlight found the cracked skylight and made it beautiful despite the crack. At twilight the chapel smelled of beeswax and rain-washed stone, and the narrator heard old echoes agree to be gentle. Queen Morwen set her crown on the altar and did not look away. Queen Morwen said, "I ruled with fear and forgot my son." Prince Rowan said, remember me now, and stand with me as mother, not sovereign." The silence that followed felt like a door opening where a wall had been. Master Aldric said, "A throne steadied by love holds longer than iron." Lady Elara touched the veiled mirror and saw it clear for the first time. Lady Elara said, "Truth walks with us or not at all." Tomas cleared his throat and offered a crooked prayer that sounded like hope with muddy boots. Tomas said, "Keep us honest and hungry only for good." The candles leaned toward a breeze that carried forgiveness instead of warning. Night gathered on the parapet where vows had learned new shapes, and the narrator stood with Rowan and Elara under a patient moon. Lady Elara said, "Your name held when iron tried to bend it." Prince Rowan said, "It held because you did not let go." Kale rose from the river light, with antlers woven from calm water. Kale said, "Speak love that frees rather than claims." Rowan took breath as if lifting a gate without hinges. Prince Rowan said, "I love you without cages, and I will keep what we save, not what we trap." The wind untied itself from old knots. Lady Elara said, "Then walk beside me, and we will open every door we feared." The guardian bowed, and the moon set a silver seal on the words. The bell did not ring, and that silence crowned them better than gold. Before dawn the city slept, and the narrator listened to a hush that promised work and wonder. Prince Rowan walked the empty market where stalls waited like blank pages. Prince Rowan said, "Let tomorrow earn its bells." Footsteps joined his, and Tomas matched the pace with the pride of a friend who had learned he belonged. Tomas said, "I saved a stew for breakfast." Master Aldric watched from a doorway and smiled like a teacher who finally trusted the lesson to live. Master Aldric said, "God, what listens?" Queen Morin crossed the square without escorts and nodded to bakers stirring the day awake. Queen Morin said, "Be kind before you are right." Lady Elara squeezed Rowan's hand and looked toward the gate. Lady Elara said, "The road waits, and so do we." The last star faded, and the future walked in on quiet feet.